We have finally made it. By the time this video is live, we will be just 1 week from the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2 and the official start of the next generation of Nintendo gaming. So today, I want to look into my crystal ball and forecast what exactly that next generation might look like with some bold predictions. The OG Switch has been around for over 8 years now, and while it's not perfect, there's no denying that it did some incredible things over its lifespan and was undoubtedly the most successful console that Nintendo has ever produced. In other words, the Switch 2 has some big shoes to fill. But I think that it's got the potential to do just that, and it starts by hitting on the predictions that I will be laying out in the following couple of minutes. Now with all that out of the way, let's get into the list and take a look at what the next 8 years of Nintendo gaming might look like. Okay, so I promise we'll get more creative as we go along, but let's start with the most obvious and low-hanging fruit available, the power of the Switch 2. I believe that this will be the console that finally brings Nintendo in line graphically with its competition. Now at first you might say, how is that a bold prediction? We already know the specs of the Switch 2, and that it's basically comparable to a PS4 in terms of power, yada yada yada. But specifically, I'm predicting that this is the generation where Nintendo gamers will finally stop getting the short end of the stick when it comes to third-party support. Despite the industry-shaking success of the original Switch, many of the big third-party games just never came to the console, as has been the case with Nintendo consoles for ages now. The Nintendo Switch is home to some of the greatest games of all time. But if that's the only console you've had over the past couple of years, then you missed out on all-time great titles such as Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3, Resident Evil 4 Remake, and countless others. The Switch 2 has the power to finally bring these marquee third-party releases back to Nintendo in a major way, and I think it's going to deliver. We're already seeing evidence of this with EA bringing the upcoming Madden 26 to the Switch 2. Any idea when the last time we got a Madden game on a Nintendo platform was? It was Madden 13 on the Nintendo Wii. Calvin Johnson was on the cover of that one for the record, so yeah, it was a long ass time ago. Those Madden games on the Wii were always severely stripped down versions of their PlayStation Xbox equivalents anyway, and after Madden 13, EA just said screw it, we're not doing this anymore. Until now. Madden is finally back on a Nintendo console, and while I don't think the Madden brand moves the needle nearly as much as it did a decade ago, this is still great to see, and I believe a really good sign of things to come. If even EA is going to repledge support to Nintendo this generation, then I believe we're going to see a lot of other developers do the same over the next couple of years. If you're still solely a Nintendo gamer, then there will still be some games you missed out on, of course, but I believe that by the end of the Switch 2 generation, these games will be more the exception rather than the norm, as it has been for so long. Alright, so next prediction. One of the best parts about the initial Nintendo Switch 2 presentation was the reveal that GameCube games will finally be coming to Nintendo Switch Online, exclusively on the Switch 2. I was hyped as hell to see this, and I believe that this is the perfect way to give NSO extra value on the new console. And while a steady stream of GameCube releases over the course of the Switch 2's life is going to be awesome, I think that Nintendo has a few more tricks up its sleeve here. I'm predicting that by the time the Switch 2 generation is winding down, we will also have Wii and DS games on the service. The Switch 1's iteration of NSO has brought us multiple console libraries from NES to GBA to N64 to even Sega Genesis games. To me, it seems unlikely that over the course of the next couple of years, the Switch 2 is only going to introduce GameCube games to the service. Maybe I'm being a bit greedy, but think about it. As beloved as the Nintendo GameCube is, it doesn't really have the biggest library in the world. Nintendo will certainly bring all the GameCube heavy hitters to the service over the next couple of years, but if the Switch 2 is around for 8 years like the Switch 1, well, Nintendo is eventually going to be scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to finding good GameCube games to bring to the service. And yes, I realize that Nintendo has no shame when it comes to drip feeding its games, so theoretically, they could stretch the GameCube library out over a much longer period of time than we would expect, but I don't know. I just think they're going to do more here. Obviously, bringing Wii or DS games to the service would require more work due to those systems' unique control gimmicks, but the mouse functionality of the Switch 2 could really help bridge some of these gaps. Why couldn't the mouse function as a pointer for a Wii game or a stylus for a DS game? The Wii and especially the DS have such deep libraries with so many classic games trapped on those consoles. Nintendo isn't dumb, they know this, and I think they're going to bring us these games at some point during the Switch 2's life. Are they going to add an additional subscription tier to NSO and charge way too much for them? Probably, but that's a discussion for another day. Alright, now let's talk about some specific games, starting with a series very near and dear to my heart. I think that the Switch 2 is going to be home to the best Pokémon generation that we've gotten in a long, long time. Part of this prediction can be chalked up to the law of averages. Gen 8 and Gen 9 in particular were so lackluster that you almost feel like Generation 10 has to be better by default, but beyond that, I think the stars really are aligning here. So many of the issues with Scarlet and Violet were related to technical problems, and now with the massive jump in power to the Switch 2, you would hope that the Gen 10 games would have none, or at least significantly fewer of those issues. Add in the fact that despite their many, many faults, Scarlet and Violet did provide a promising proof of concept of a Pokemon open world game to build on, and I think that we might actually get a return to form with this next generation of titles. I know we're getting Pokemon Legends ZA in October, and I'm looking forward to that game, but obviously the next mainline games are what we're really waiting for. And if those games come out hot and review substantially better than Scarlet and Violet did, I think they would do wonders for the Switch 2. Imagine all the lapsed Pokemon fans running out to buy Switch 2 because they hear that this is a generation that can't be missed. I think Nintendo and Game Freak realize the pressure on these games, which is why we've yet to hear anything about them. But that's a good thing. After Scarlet and Violet, I don't have any issue with these games taking a little bit longer in the oven. Generation 10 Pokemon games knocking it out of the park might seem like a long shot considering the recent downward trajectory of the series, but hey, these are bold predictions, right? And I really do think that there's reason for optimism on this front. And while we're on the subject of big Nintendo Switch 2 games, let's talk about another heavy hitter. Let's talk about The Legend of Zelda. And no, I'm not talking about the sequel to Tears of the Kingdom. That game is inevitable and will obviously be released on the Switch 2 down the road, but since it's such a guarantee and will almost assuredly be one of the biggest games of the Switch 2's life, I want to talk about something a little bit less certain. What if the Switch 2 finally brought us that long-awaited Ocarina of Time remake? I think it makes perfect sense and could be an absolute slam dunk for the console. Like I said, a team is certainly already hard at work on the next major Zelda title, but that one is still years away from being ready, and you know Nintendo is going to want to fill that long wait with smaller Zelda titles like they've done in the past. And while smaller original titles like Echoes of Wisdom are also possible, I don't think there's ever been a better time to give us that completely rebuilt Ocarina of Time game that we've always imagined. For one, the Zelda franchise will be celebrating its 40th anniversary in 2026, making it the perfect time to release some sort of big celebration title. Other than a sequel to Tears of the Kingdom, what could possibly be bigger than an Ocarina of Time remake? And with the horsepower of the Switch 2 now available to play with, Nintendo could do some crazy things here. As great as Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are, I wouldn't necessarily say they're masterpieces from a visual perspective. They have great art styles, of course, but they were obviously held back from a technical perspective due to the Switch 1's lack of power. Additionally, the massive open world nature of those games led to visual compromises as well. We've had some gorgeous open world games over the years, but if you're going for a pure technical showcase, my understanding is it would be easier to create that in a more curated linear game, where there are significantly less variables at play at any given moment. This is why an Ocarina of Time remake on Switch 2 would be so perfect. A new version of Ocarina of Time built for modern audiences with the power of the Switch 2 behind it has the potential to be the most technically impressive game that Nintendo has ever created. Imagine that version of Hyrule Field and the beauty of the game's temples and dungeons all flawlessly rebuilt and running in 4K at 60 frames per second. It would be glorious. Add in some quality of life features and overhaul the game's combat mechanics, and you have the potential for one of the greatest remakes of all time. Not to mention, in terms of overall hype levels, I'm not sure Nintendo could announce anything that would generate more buzz than a big boy Ocarina of Time remake like I'm proposing here. This would be the perfect game to get people to buy a Switch 2 after that first initial wave of consoles sell. I truly think that within the next couple of years, we could be getting lost in Ocarina of Time all over again. And my final prediction, I believe that by the end of the Switch 2's life, Nintendo will have completely reshaped the way that we consume video game news with its Nintendo Today app. No longer will gamers need to rely on boring traditional social media apps like X or Blue Sky for their video game news. No. Instead, all of us will be getting our news from the app of the future, Nintendo Today. In fact, more traditional social media platforms will probably shut down over the next couple of years, as the mass exodus of gamers from those sites to Nintendo Today will end up being too great a loss for those platforms to endure. Nintendo Today will move to a paid subscription service where it will shatter subscription records as consumers flock to the news app of the future. Okay, I'm obviously kidding on this one. But man, can you imagine? If this somehow did come true, this would be the boldest prediction of all. I would look like a freaking prophet. Nintendo Today continues to be one of the weirdest things Nintendo has announced in recent memory. And if I had to bet, I don't think it will even survive the entirety of the Switch 2 generation. But hey, Nintendo got a Nintendo. Anyway, now I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you think of the predictions in this video in the comment section below. And more importantly, share some of your bold predictions for the Switch 2 generation as well. And of course, as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.